Well, it's been a frantic week for Boris Johnson, fighting the biggest political battle of his career, determined, of course, to hold on to the keys of number 10. But there's a hell of a lot more on his plate. I'm delighted to welcome back, as our regular Wednesday night international panel, two worldly gentlemen. From Sydney, co-host of Outsiders, James Morrow, and from Adelaide, host of Bernardi, Corey Bernardi. Corey, I'll start with you if I can. Boris was in Kiev. Isn't it strange? He's had to flee to the Ukraine to avoid Fleet Street, reaffirming Britain's concern about the clear and present danger of an imminent Russian campaign into Ukraine. Also put his money where his mouth is, an £88 million commitment. Where's this headed, do you think?
Well, the Ukraine is a very specific circumstance. I think Biden has demonstrated enormous weakness, and so that's empowered Russia, who will probably pursue their interests there by having an invasion. And the problem with that, Peter, is, of course, that will then trigger Russia to trigger China, who may then think, well, hang on, if the world is going to sit back and do nothing, we can maybe have a go at Taiwan. So Boris Johnson and others are desperately trying to flex a little bit of muscle to prevent Russia from taking action. But I don't think Vladimir Putin will be dissuaded at all. He's got Europe over a barrel because of gas and oil and a whole range of other things. And Boris, I think, quite frankly, is hoping that this will prove a monumental distraction from his domestic woes, Peter.
Look, and as we saw, James, earlier with the China issue, China and Russia, led by two strong men in the old Soviet, old Maoist style, they're not going to waste a weak Joe Biden as president, are they?
Well, no, that's right. I mean, Joe Biden has created the weakest foreign policy the United States has seen, certainly in my lifetime, certainly since Jimmy Carter, that utterly feckless president of the United States in the late 70s, who lost Iran, lost Afghanistan, and again encouraged the Soviet Union to run rampant around the world. This is exactly the same sort of circumstance we're seeing now, except we've now got China, who is actually, I think, far more dangerous than Russia. You know, the Russian calculations around whether or not to go into Ukraine, I think there's an awful lot of brinksmanship happening on both sides, and Vladimir Putin is going to be considering an awful lot of things when he thinks about whether or not to do this, including the possibility of having to deal with another insurgent front in Ukrainian territory, which he's trying to hold. China, however, I think has no such qualms. They're the much bigger power in all of this. If they decide to make the Pacific a Chinese lake and evict, essentially, the U.S. by taking control of Taiwan, then we've got a real problem. And for Joe Biden to be talking about getting bogged down, you know, in some sort of fight with Russia over Ukraine, I think is to really miss the main game.
Yeah, look, and coming out of the Ukraine issue, also we saw out of Afghanistan, there's the movement of people. We're not far away from summer again, and the people at the top of Africa start to move through the Mediterranean. Corey, you know, for all of the Partygate and COVID issues that Boris Johnson has had on his plate, core business is stopping the boats across the Channel. He just hasn't demonstrated the resolve, and I think that's where he's going to be in trouble.
Yeah, it's another domestic problem for him, and it's a multi-pronged one, of course. He's got the influences around him who want migration and don't care if people come in illegally, you know, the do-gooders. We had them here as well, Peter. But he's also got Europe. Now, Europe obviously are still a bit embittered towards the UK for breaking away, and they're not doing much to stop them either. Now, the problem with all of this is that if a country can't control its borders, it doesn't control its destiny. And particularly with an island nation, if they allow this virtual armada of, mini craft and illegal migrants to be, effectively taking control of their border protection regime, then all will be lost, because that will just fuel more and more and more. So Boris Johnson and his advisors need to take a leaf out of Tony Abbott's books. They need to stop the boats. They need to protect their borders and to make sure that the UK remains a sovereign nation.
Yeah, not just trade. Maybe they need to get Tony Abbott to give Boris some advice on exactly that. Amnesty International, James, put out a report today. They're calling Israel an apartheid state. I don't hear their criticisms about the Uyghurs in China and many other issues as vociferously as I do the Jewish state. I tell you, this is institutional anti-Semitism, surely.
Of course it is. It's completely institutional anti-Semitism. There's no other word for it. To call Israel an apartheid state when Palestinian Arabs can sit in the Israeli parliament, hello, I'm sorry, that's not what an apartheid state looks like. You know, they should look at the current state of things on the ground, Peter. The Gaza Strip, that's not occupied by Israel. That's run by Hamas. The Palestinian Authority runs the West Bank. It is not occupied. There's not an apartheid system in any meaning of the word. And I'll tell you what, on many, many levels, including personal liberties, the rights of religious minorities, the rights of sexual minorities, Arabs have a much better chance and a much better life in Israel, in the state of Israel, than they do in the Gaza Strip, than they do in the West Bank. These are facts, you know, and for Amnesty International to go and make Israel the great boogeyman of human rights when you've got China, when you've got Russia, when you've got all these other countries, you know, deeply anti-Western, but I guess that's what they like because they're anti-Western, because that's what Amnesty International has become now. You know, then they just say, oh, well, you know, it'll be like the Sydney Festival, we'll just beat up on Israel.
Yeah, but this is the thing, isn't it, Corey? I mean, last week, we've got 1 in 4 Australians saying they don't know anything about the Holocaust. I find that in itself horrifying, but that's where we are. We've got this global rise in anti-Semitism. You've got Whoopi Goldberg out there saying, very disturbingly, the Holocaust was not about race. She's been given a 2-week suspension, but she hasn't been cancelled. And then you've got this issue now with Amnesty International.
Yeah, it's a huge problem. I mean, the new racism, of course, is to say you're not racist and to discriminate against everyone who's not the same colour as you. And that's mostly in the Black Lives Matter community. And that's what Whoopi Goldberg, of course, did so grotesquely last week. I suspect she's been suspended more to mitigate the damage to the corporate than for any genuine outrage on the left, quite frankly, because anti-Semitism and racism is actually entrenched on the left. When they point a finger at someone else and accuse them of something, there are always, you know, 3 fingers pointing back at themselves. And they know in their heart and in their soul that they do not believe in equality. They want superiority of one race over another. They want to find bugbears to fuel their grievances and to, you know, entrench their own authority and power. It's a very disturbing trend. You can see videos all over the place of attacks on Jews, attacks on white people and Asian people simply for, you know, their religious beliefs or their ethnicity. It's just an appalling indictment, I think, on institutional leftism, and we've got to put a stop to it as soon as we can, Peter.
Keep speaking up, Corey and James. Thank you for coming back, 2022.